My name is Sarah and I'm a student producer with BSB. Welcome to another episode of the COVID Economy Highlight Reels. In this video, I'll be sharing some of the key takeaways from our live panel discussion on Zoom that was hosted by Dr. Jason Choo. We also had the pleasure of having Independent Trustee Director Fiona McNabb and NAB Pricing Strategist Vincent Lau as our special guests for this particular episode. Without further ado, let's dive in and learn a thing or two about the future of superannuation. So earlier this year, the Australian government has given the green light for temporary early access to superannuation as part of its economic response to COVID-19. This meant that Australians who are financially affected by the pandemic are now able to access up to $10,000 of their superannuation if eligible terms and conditions apply. Now, if you're not from Australia, personal superannuation, often simply known as super, is money that's put aside and saved while you're working, so you can enjoy a regular income later in life when you retire. For most people, super begins when you start work. Your employer starts paying a portion of your salary or wages into a super fund for you. Since superannuation helps people for retirement, is it a good idea to allow people to withdraw early? Let's hear what our experts have to say.
So effectively, the ability, so you can take out $10,000 this financial, up to $10,000 this financial year, and also another $10,000 next financial year. And the way you do that is effectively applying through the tax office, the ATO, and then effectively as a trustee, we effectively get a download of requests for people from our super funds from the tax office that we process. So it's very much run by the tax office. One of the most important things around superannuation is that it must meet what we call the sole purpose test. In other words, it must be for the sole purpose of providing for your retirement. In the past, you have only been able to get your money out before retirement due to making a hardship claim, and there have been quite rigorous requirements around making a hardship claim. And they have been, and so you've made a hardship claim to the trustee for a superannuation fund, and they've accessed whether you could. It would be, for example, if you had a terminal illness or you'd lost your job and you couldn't meet your mortgage, things like that. So it is quite a big deal to allow early access to superannuation, and in fact, in practice, outside the whole concept of superannuation. But obviously, we are in incredibly unexpected and unusual times at the moment, as evidenced by the fact that we're all here in our little rooms feeling all slightly crazy. And obviously, some people are suffering more than others.
So I can understand why the government and many people are for taking out their super, which, you know, as Fiona said, it's probably if you're in a dire situation and you're at the end of your rope, which I can understand. However, for, I guess, the general population or the general Australians, I don't agree that withdrawing $10,000 from your super is a good idea. You know, the Australian super, the industry super, as well as ASIC have said that if you withdraw $10,000 today, you can be anywhere between $44,000 up to $100,000 worse off when you retire age 67. So I don't particularly agree that it is a good idea. You know, look at all the other available options before you take it out, because it is probably going to affect you more at retirement. And I guess the other point that why I am sort of against it is the fact that generally women are disadvantaged with super upon retirement. You know, generally women would take 1 to 2 years off, maybe up to 36 months off, to raise a family, have children, that sort of thing. And during that time, they won't contribute any super, which would then cause that compounding effect to not really take place. So usually, you know, if a woman to take 2 to 3 years off, they're usually anywhere between $100,000 to $150,000 worse off compared to a man at retirement. And, you know, if they were to take $10,000 off as well right now, they're doing further damage. So I feel like, yes, you should take it, but only if you're in a, you know, you have no other options and you need to do this. Otherwise, I don't think it is a good idea for anyone to take $10,000 from their super account right now.
things are pretty desperate for a lot of people. So I think the sorts of things that the government has done have been good, and this is one of them. I'm not sure that I would have necessarily done what they've done, but I think the sorts of things they did, including giving people who are desperate access to the superannuation, is a good thing. I think only people who are truly desperate, in other words, starving international students or starving musicians or actors or whatever, are the sort of people that should get it.
Some people are saying it's only $10,000. So if I can take $10,000 now out of my super, I may have millions of dollars in my super. Will it really be that bad at the end of the day?
Being finance people, we do all understand the magic of compounding and the impact that would have. And people who don't understand compounding will just, as you say, Jason, just go, well, it's only $10,000. That's a really great TV. Would I rather have a great TV now or an extra $60,000 or $70,000 when I retire? And we're all smart enough to know that the utility is definitely there in the extra superannuation, but I don't necessarily think that the average person who's not a finance expert would understand that.
I think if you really need to take it, then that's understandable. However, with the compounding effect, I don't think it's a good idea in general. As I mentioned before, generally women, because of the fact that they do take time off to have children, raise a family, they are already disadvantaged with the compounding effect. So if they were to take $10,000 right now, it might not be a good idea, because then you have $10,000 less, which would then lose that compounding effect, which means when you're age 67, you could pretty much be, anywhere between 100 to 150 or even $200,000 worse off. But, if we're all in finance, and I'm guessing most of the students here are finance majors, perhaps we won't have that. But for the general Australian who's perhaps working in a factory or in hospitality or those type of industries which are currently shut down, they're already placing themselves at a further disadvantage compared to, I guess the finance people who have plum jobs or hopefully be earning a higher salary. So I think we need to really take a look at who really will be disadvantaged in the long run. For, us finance people, it probably won't be as a big an effect. Obviously, it will take a hit. But if we were working hospitality or retail, perhaps, in the long run when we retire, will be just worse off.
The key long-term repercussion is that you wouldn't just be $10,000 worse off in your retirement. You could be up to 100,000 plus worse off in retirement. And for me, that makes a lot of sense, because right now with students, if you're 18, 19, 20 years old, if, for example, you had that 10,000 to take out now, you'd actually be losing out on, from 20 years old to 67 or 70 years, you'd be losing out on 50 years worth of investment returns.
A live poll was also conducted asking our audiences if they would be interested into withdrawing their superannuation early, and we've got some pretty interesting results.
We have, yes, because I'm experiencing financial hardship. Wow, 0% of students intend to withdraw their super because they're experiencing financial hardship. Interestingly, 28%, over a quarter of students are intending to withdraw even though they don't have financial hardship.
Which is what Vince and I were saying was an absolute no-no.
However, I would say that I would withdraw it if I was an international student who doesn't have PR or citizenship, mainly because of the fact that you're only here for 3 or 4 years, in which case your super would just be lost. So if I was an international student who was not intending to retire or stay in Australia after graduation, yeah, I would take it out, because of the fact that it's your money that you've earned, but you can't touch until you're 67, in which case, when you're 67, you might have forgotten, or the fact that it would have been eroded because of fees. So if those students that voted yes and they're international students, then fair enough. But otherwise, I don't think it's a good idea.
No, you'll find in practice, from my experience when I've been watching who's been taking money, because we do get, so I've been seeing not names, but just detail, but just sort of high level information about the sort of people who are withdrawing their funds. And it does appear that people who are withdrawing their funds are those with not very much money in the fund. So if you've got a couple of $1,000s in there, you might withdraw it. But if you have, say, $80,000 or $90,000 in it, it looks like it's less likely that you'll withdraw it. So it does look like this, it might be somebody who's been working part-time through university in third year, got a few, got $3,000 or $4,000 in there, who withdraws it. As I said, not somebody who's 32, and got a solid amount in there. And I can certainly understand, and I think that's not an unreasonable thing. We are finding that the average amount that people are taking out of super is relatively low, because it tends to be the people with the lower balances that are taking it out, rather than people with 300,000 going, oh, I'll just take $5,000 out. It's the ones who have, as I said, $3,000 in their super fund who are electing to take the $3,000 out.
I was speaking to a few of my friends who are financial planners and also bankers for very wealthy individuals, or very wealthy business owners. And these wealthy business owners, they're taking advantage of this withdrawal, where because of the fact they run their own business, they probably do taxation, things that are legal but probably frowned upon, or very grey areas. So they're using this as an advantage to take that $10,000 out of their self-managed super funds or super funds in general, and then they're just channeling it back into their business to expand or fund some other aspects. So I understand that it will help certain people, but with any initiative, it will always be exploited by a small group. And in this instance, it's the wealthy or the 1% or whatever you want to call them, which I find that it's a massive loophole.
Make a huge difference, because the people who are accessing it tend to either have quite small balances or be quite desperate. So in fact, if they weren't taking it out of their super, they would in fact be getting handouts from the government as well in most cases. So from what I can tell, it's not being abused to the extent that somebody who's living a fairly comfortable life isn't taking out their $10,000, as I said, to buy a new smart TV, or to go and, or to put a deposit on a new car or something like that. So it does appear to me that it's being used the way it should be. To some extent, part of the problem with superannuation is you can't protect people from themselves, because it's their money, and we give them the right, for example, to choose balanced versus cash versus aggressive and whatever. And so that means that to some extent we don't protect them from themselves. So that's a disadvantage of superannuation, I think, is that people can do stupid things with their money, and people can behave irrationally, taking out money from super they don't want. Whereas, as McNabb quite rightly points out, at least if you're doing government handouts, then assuming it's done well, and it isn't always, then hopefully it will go to the right people and they will spend it in the right way.
And for students who aren't familiar with the different types of government handouts that exist, apart from what's been happening in Australia, governments all around the world, for example, have been issuing rebates, telling electricity companies refund the past 2 quarters of electricity bills, refund the past couple of quarters of water bills, or the next quarter's council rates, the next quarter's water bills, electricity bills will be free, giving handouts this way, as opposed to letting people take out the money, by which we don't know how they would spend it. So maybe they'll, instead of going to Crown Casino, they'll go on
You see, Harvey Norman love handouts. They love them, because as soon as you get a handout, you go and buy the TV or the new sofa. They love it.
Obviously, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, your balance or your bank balance should usually be close to zero or around zero. So, if you have to wait 7 to 8 weeks, even with, suspension of your rent and your utilities and those sort of things, you still got to at least eat, and there are other bills that you need to pay in order to maintain a standard of living. And I can see why they're doing it. However, I'm still of the stance that despite understanding the situation, I don't agree with it. And, speaking to, and Fiona, you said that, the people that are drawing the money are usually those that have very low balance. So which further indicates that the people who are drawing the money are the ones that are living on a paycheck to paycheck, or in the hospitality industry, or those that, as you said, musicians, or, those industries that are currently closed and we don't even know when they're open again. So I can see why, And, I feel for them, and I can, hopefully that 10,000 does help them. But I believe that there are better ways to help people out, or at least the general Australian, instead of just one area, I guess, which is what the super withdrawal is trying to target.
Yeah.
If you still have burning questions like, why is the amount set at 10K? Why not 5, why not 20, why not 30? Should this be means tested instead of being universal? Are there appropriate checks and balances in place to prevent fraud? Should the government borrow and repay stimulus instead of placing the burdens on individuals? You might find some answers by watching the full recording of this episode that is now made available on the Business School Broadcast YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in, and if you've learned a thing or two from us today, that's super.